Hello, my name is Yépez, and I will be presenting this paper, in which I explore what are the sources of business cycle fluctuations in small open economies. This paper is motivated by the ongoing debate about what are the true sources of aggregate fluctuations in small open economies. The competing explanations range from transitory shocks to productivity, shocks to the trend growth in productivity, interest rates shocks which affect the small open economies, and more recently, the observation that one important component of the terms of trade, namely commodity price shocks, appear as an important candidate in this question. So to motivate the importance of commodity prices, this newer candidate to explain business fluctuations, this is the case of Mexico. We're showing the blue line is the detrended commodity price for Mexico, and on the dashed line, the growth rate of GDP. And we observe that commodity price declines are usually associated with declines in economic activity. Turning into prices, we see that, particularly in the last 10 years, in Mexico, commodity price declines have been associated with real exchange rate depreciations. In the case of Canada, a high-income country, we also observe the blue line is the country-specific commodity price for Canada, and there are large declines of commodity prices which appear to be associated with declines in economic activity in Canada. And similarly, we see a stronger association between the country-specific commodity price index in Canada and the real exchange rate in Canada. So the most recent literature, both theoretical and empirical, points towards an important role for commodity prices on small open economies. In addition, their studies seem to suggest an empirical regularity regarding commodity prices, that they tend to be associated with fluctuations in country spreads. So this study adds to this literature in that I'm interested in reassessing what are the sources of business cycle fluctuation in small open economies. And to do that, I'm gonna take an off-the-shelf small open economy model with all the traditional candidates and add the dimension of commodity price shocks. And I'm gonna take them all to the data and do a quantitative estimation exercise for the particular case of a high-income country, Canada, and a middle-income country, Mexico. So what are the results? A quick preview of the results of this study. Number one, my quantitative exercise confirms the evidence that commodity price shocks are important in explaining the variability of macroeconomic aggregates. So that is in line with recent studies. But in addition to that, and more importantly, when looking at the international price dimension, commodity prices are associated with explaining about 1/3 of the volatility of real exchange rates in these countries in the sample. And finally, in addition to the to this ongoing debate, the results seem to indicate that it is transitory shocks to productivity which are the major driver of fluctuations. In the specific case of real exchange rates, price fluctuations, there's empirical evidence to argue for an important role of commodity prices in the fluctuations of real exchange rates. So my co-author and I show that real exchange rate volatility is in large part, about 1/3, explained by commodity price shock volatility. So this study adds to this empirical dimension just documented by developing an off-the-shelf small open economy model with the commodity sector and estimating it to let the data speak about what are the sources that drive fluctuations in Canada and Mexico. The model, just key relations to keep in mind, there is a commodity exporting sector, the second equation. Commodity is used as an input for production, the first equation. And the third equation is just the fact that for these small open economies, commodity price shocks are exogenous. Commodity prices are exogenous. And just equilibrium condition, commodity production adds to the country's output, and the small open economy assumption that interest rates are subject to exogenous shocks and are related in reduced form immediately to commodity price fluctuations and fluctuations in the level of debt in the country. The basic calibration of the model draws on current literature, but the next table shows the estimates from the Bayesian exercise, where I use as observables quarterly data for GDP per capita, consumption per capita, and investment per capita, as well as the trade balance and the country-specific commodity price index. The table here shows the results for the case of Mexico. So what is of note is to observe that the sensitivity of interest rates to commodity prices is relatively small compared to the sensitivity to changes in debt. So the phi parameter is larger than the psi parameter. In addition, transitory shocks to productivity are relatively persistent, as are shocks to commodity prices, but commodity prices are the more volatile of all. In the case of Canada, the estimates are qualitatively of a similar order, other than the magnitude quantitatively is smaller for the case of Canada, as it would be expected. In these next three slides, I show the mechanism for three primal driving forces of business cycles. The first one is a cyclical shock to productivity. So an increase in productivity that is temporary increases GDP consumption and investment. It's associated with a counter-cyclical interest rate and with a real exchange rate depreciation, so as would be expected from a standard theory. In addition, a transitory shock to productivity is counterfactually associated with pro-cyclical trade balance. What about the permanent shock to productivity? Well, the permanent shock to productivity on impact has a positive effect, but this effect is reversed in the middle to long run in terms of input, income, consumption, and investment. In addition, the real interest rate is pro-cyclical, which is counterfactual. And importantly, we see that real exchange rates appreciate in response to a permanent shock to productivity. So this is different from the transitory shock. And the trade balance pro-cyclical, so that's not that different. Finally, the commodity price shock, an increase in commodity price is associated with increases in GDP consumption and investment. But importantly, and in difference with the permanent shock, it's associated with a counter-cyclical interest rate. And in distinction with the transitory shock to productivity, a commodity price increase is associated with the depreciation of the real exchange rate, with an appreciation of the real exchange rate. Finally, consistent with the empirical observation of counter-cyclical trade balances, a commodity price increase is associated with a counter-cyclical trade balance in the medium to long run. The last part of the presentation is just forecast error variance decomposition exercise to show what are the relative contribution of shocks. And what we see is that the first column, the cyclical component of TFP is the largest driver of fluctuations. But after that, commodity price shocks explain about 1/3 of the variability of macro quantities, as well as the real exchange rate. This is for the case of Mexico. For the case of Canada, the importance of the cyclical component of productivity is smaller, but importantly, the importance of the commodity price shock remains at about 1/3, explaining the volatility of consumption, investment, and income, as well as the real exchange rate. The difference between the high-income country Canada and the middle-income country Mexico here is that other shocks seem to be important for explaining the volatility of interest rates, the trade balance ratio, and the real exchange rate in the case of Canada. So to conclude, this paper adds to the ongoing debate about the sources of fluctuations in small open economies. I take the particular stand of a commodity exporting country and show that it is indeed the case that commodity prices explain about 1/3 of variability of business cycle variables. But in addition to that, the novel contribution of this study is to show that in terms of international prices, commodity price shocks contribute about 1/3 of the volatility of real exchange rates. And further, commodity price increases are associated with appreciations of the real exchange rate that are of persistent nature. Future research should be carried out to investigate whether the importance of commodity shocks is still as prominent in the case of non-commodity exporting countries. Thank you for your attention.